Hey folks, Re-Gor here. So I have another disclaimer for you. However, this episode is in no way, shape, or form controversial, like our last episode in which we discussed John Carpenter's Vampires. My guest today is Juan Ortiz from the B Movie Cast, and we talked about two Mexican vampire films. However, we had someone that pulled out at the last minute, and so we had a slot open. So what I've decided to do was to split this episode into two because we talked about two different films. So what you're going to hear today basically will be part one of the Mexican films. And then at a later point, you'll hear part two. So today we are going to discuss the Mexican film, The World of the Vampires from 1960. And I'll be back at the end to remind you of all this, and we'll go from there. So sit back and enjoy the show.
Hey guys, this is Sean Kanan, and you are listening to the Then Is Now podcast.
Warning, warning!
Today's episode contains spoilers. So if you have not seen the movie or TV show that we are talking about, we highly recommend that you watch it first, then listen to this episode. Thank you.
Rise and shine, my sinners. When Father Evil starts his day, he gets a little deadly. Deadly Grounds coffee has the richest, smoothest flavor you'll find anywhere. It's sinfully delicious. Once you go deadly, you never go back. Order yours at getdeadly.com. Coffee's so good, it's scary.
Welcome to 13 Days of Hallowtober.
Hello and welcome to Then Is Now Podcast's yearly 13-day of Hallowtober event. I'm your host, Re-Gor. In years past, we've covered the scariest films of all time, as well as zombie movies last year. This year's topic is vampire movies. And joining me today is a newcomer to the show, although he's not a newcomer to podcasting, Juan Ortiz of the amazing and wildly popular B Movie Cast. Welcome to the show, Juan.
Thank you, Roger. It's a pleasure being on the show with you this morning.
It's awesome. So glad to have you. You know, we had you here before. Well, not on Then Is Now, but we had you on the Fright Lounge video show, and looking forward to have you back again on that. But before we get into the films that we're going to cover, can you just sort of tell the listeners about yourself and about the B Movie Cast?
Sure, not a problem. Well, basically, what I've been into films many years. I've been collecting classic sci-fi horror films, and I got into the Mexican filmography because that's one of my main topics now, as I had visited Mexico various occasions and times, and I wanted to see what the lore was, because as a kid I remember watching a lot of these Mexican movies on Chiller Theater, Fright Night, on TV late night, and of course these were the English dubbed versions. But I've been into the films now about a good 35 years. I've been, collecting and watching classic horror sci-fi films, and the Mexican filmography side of it came into play in the early 80s. And that's when I started getting an interest in these films, because they're very obscure. They're not rarely seen here in the United States. Internationally, they have been seen worldwide in many different countries. But here in the States, only late night television. And I said, well, you know what? I'm gonna start, doing some research into these films. And lo and behold, I was able to get into some great contact people down in Mexico, and I started searching old theaters. Believe it or not, Roger, I was hunting to try to find any kind of memorabilia relating to these films, i.e. lobby cards, old movie posters of the films. Nice. From the theaters. And I was able to get quite a bit of them, an extensive lobby card collection, Mexican lobby cards on all these horror films. So it intrigued me, and I said, you know what, I'm going to try to come back, and I'm going to see if I can create this genre, open it and develop it into the market in the U.S., where the Americans can see what the other side of Mexico is as far as Mexican horror, classic ones. I mean, we have our side over here, of course, Universal from the 30s, 40s, and but Mexico at the same time during that period was exploring our Universal horror films, so they decided to do their take on it. So I went on, continued to do that, and I started doing conventions in the early '90s. I started my convention trade routes where I was doing shows and conventions and trying to, let the fans know, hey, check out this type of horror. It's pretty cool, and it worked. So we developed a big fan base throughout the '90s, and then in the 2000s, early, I started doing more conventions. I was exposing myself, and then I started going to a convention called Monster Bash. This is up in Pittsburgh, in Pennsylvania, and I went there as a guest back in 2005, the first time, just to see the show. And lo and behold, that particular event, that convention, was already doing filmings of Mexican horror. They were exploring the Mexican horror filmography at the Monster Bash. And I said, wow, this is a perfect niche. And I talked to the promoter, and he said, yeah, my people really like these films, and I wish we can get more and more of them. Of course, the ones that he had at the time were all Spanish versions of the films. He didn't have any that were English or none that were subtitled. So I says, oh, wow. So, I started, working and got into play because I got a company in California that does subtitling for me. And a lot of these Mexican horror films, I've got subtitles to that were never had subtitles before. So the fans can really, if they don't know the Spanish, they can at least read the subtitles and get the plot summary of the film and know what the film is about. So Mr. Adams at the Monster Bash, he said, Daniel, we'd love to have you as a vendor. What kind of stuff do you sell? I basically told him I'm into the classic sci-fi horror. I do horror from the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, of course, 70s. And I'm also into the Mexican filmography. And he was amazed. He said, oh, wow, this is just what we need. We'd love to have you come to our show and attend it. So I did. My first show there was 2006. And, I went to the show, and that's where I met the very first time Vince Rotolo, who had started, actually, he was on the verge of starting a new podcast. Back then, those were the early stages of podcasting, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
A lot of people didn't really know how to go about to do it. They didn't know how it was involved. It was with radio, or do you have to go on live TV to do it and all. But he was exploring that, and he says, you know what, I'm thinking of putting together a show, and I'm going to call it the B Movie Cast, because he's a huge fan of what I am too, which was Mexican classic movies, classic Universal horrors. He loved classic sci-fi from the 50s. One of his favorite films, and I got to add this, this is how we really hit it off really good, was The Invasion of the Saucermen from 1957. And that was his all-time classic film. So lo and behold, he stayed about 3 hours at my table talking about movies, and his wife came by about 2 or 3. Vince, come on, they said, wait, I'll be there in a minute. And we went on and on and on, and we developed our friendship. And then the following year, in 2007, I was there. He came back and we talked. And then he said, I would like to invite you as a guest on my podcast. I have a new podcast. It's called the B Movie Cast. And I'd love to have you on. I have another gentleman by the name of Nick Brown, who's a co-host, and myself. And my wife, at the time, Mary was not a co-host. She was like in the background. It was just him and Nick. And I says, I'd love to, come on the show a couple of times. So that's what happened. And I went on for a couple of episodes. And I guess Nick liked it. He liked it so much that he got emails from fans saying, hey, you need to get that guy Juan back on the show. he really knows his stuff about all these movies, man. He's like the Robin Osborne of Mexican filmography. I said, wait a minute. I said, okay. So then he approached me again. He sent me an email. I says, Juan, how would you like to be a second co-host on this show? This was not even a year later when he had started his show.
Wow.
So that's how it happened. So I became a regular, on the cast, and we started doing all these amazing horror, classic, sci-fi, you name it. We even got into spaghetti westerns. We did it all, and the fans loved it. We built a database of fans, about over 1,000, up until 2010, 11, and the show was going strong. We were doing shows every Sunday, and they started out at 1 hour to an hour and 20 minutes, and then they went on to an hour and a half, 2 hours, 2.5. And then before you knew it, we were almost at the 3 hour mark doing a podcast, similar to you.
Yeah.
What you did with the Zoomcast. And, we kind of said, well, we need to cut it back down a little bit, because if we're doing this on a weekly basis, we need to kind of keep it down. The fans loved it. And we did get a lot of listeners. A lot of the listeners back then now have their own shows. They have their own podcasts. They have their own blogs. And it's amazing how they got the inspiration, because Vince was a very mellow man. He talked, he was himself. He wasn't trying to be a radio host personality. He wasn't trying to be a TV host. He was himself. And that's what the people liked, to be yourself. You
Right.
talk about what you love, and, that's what it's all about. And we went on, and I tell you, it was amazing, because every year that I would go to the Bash, we started developing and having like a family of the B-movie cast. And a lot of the members, a lot of the listeners would go into the show to meet Vince and meet me and meet Mary and Nick. And it became a tradition. Every year we would have, huge numbers of fans come to the show just to hang out with us and be with us and hear stories and everything else. So that's how it happened. And until what happened is this, unfortunately, in 2017, Vince Rotolo, 2017, he passed away.
Right.
And, and it was a huge loss. I mean, the whole community felt that very emotionally. We, to the point to where I actually went to his home. Me, Nick, and Mary, we were there, and we actually did a live cast from the actual room where he used to do this every week. And it was so emotional, and we really, everybody missed him. And we had a thing at the B-movie, at the Monster Bash. We did a tribute to him. Ron did a special tribute in his honor. And he was even given the Golden Fourier Award, because every year Ron Adams hands out an award. It's a statue. It's like an Academy Award.
Yeah.
It's called the Golden Fourier, the Fourier-Aikman Award. He hands it out to, special individuals and people that been with the Monster Bash for years and years. And Vince, was honored to be one of the ones to receive that. His wife received it posthumously. So, I mean, and then that was it. So, but to this day, we're still keeping it alive, because Mary, I had talked to her and say, look, we need to keep this alive, because we still got a lot of fans. We don't have the fans we had before, but we still got a lot of listeners that still call in and send emails. And we wanted to hit the 500th episode. If anything, I told Mary, let's try to make it to 500, because that would be an accomplishment in itself. And
Right.
We did.
Yeah.
We were able to reach 500, which was another one of Vince's favorite movies, which was a Clockwork Orange.
Right.
So we did. Did you listen to that one?
Yes. Oh, yeah. I listen to every one of them.
Okay. Yeah, that was almost a 4-hour cast, by the way. We had a lot of fun with it, and that's what it's all about, really expressing ourselves out to the fans and the listeners that love to hear these shows. So I'm still with it, and I still do the conventions, and I'm getting ready to head up north here in about 2 weeks. I'm going to Baltimore to do a different kind of a convention, Roger. It's a little bit different, because I happen to be into classic silent films and pre-code films, and a lot of the films from the silent era in the early 30s, believe it or not.
Oh, nice.
I'm a fanatic of that. And I'm going to a convention called the Mid-Atlantic Nostalgia Convention. I don't know if you've heard of it or not.
Yes, I have, actually.
And Martin Grams, who's the promoter, tremendous guy. He's a great friend. I've been doing that show now for like about 13 or 14 years now. And it's a great in-between show from doing my horror ones. And just to see, get on the nostalgic side and, the comedies, the musicals and all this, westerns, film noir, cover it all. And it's amazing, Roger, that you see how many people really get into this and they come and we talk movies, basically just to talk about movies and what we like, what we, how we feel about these films and everything. So I do that show. I'm doing that in a couple of weeks, and then I'm going to be heading out to Chiller Theater in October, the 27th or the 26th of October, a week before Halloween.
Nice.
I'm going up to New Jersey to do Chiller Theater, which is another great show. It's a 3-day event. Then I'll be coming back to Florida, and I'll be ending up the year, wrapping it up in December. I'm doing a convention in Ocala, Florida, called Spookala. Spookala. It's kind of like a weird name, but it's a horror convention. Now, that convention is primarily 80s, a lot of the 80s horror. So you're going to see all the Freddy Kruegers, all the Jasons, you're going to see all the Michael Myers walking around, and everything is centered around 80s horror and 70s too. So I'll be doing that one at the end of the year, and that'll wrap up the year for me. Continuing to do these shows, we get in the B-movie cast every once in a while. We get in a Mexican horror one. We either do a Lucha Libre, a Santo Blue Demon, or we do one of the obscure horror films.
Right.
Now, the two films we're talking about today, believe it or not, we have not done the Empire of Dracula, but we did do the World of the Vampires.
Okay.
So I mean, looking forward to maybe next year we might tackle the Empire of Dracula, because it's a good one. And that's it. That's going to be the wrap up for the year for me, and I'm loving this stuff, Roger.
Oh, yeah. I mean, good for you, man. You're so busy, and everything just keeps moving forward. It's really awesome. And I think I told you before, I have to say, Vince and the B-Movie Cast was really what inspired me to get these podcasts off the ground. In fact, I've got another one, as of this recording, which is early September, I've got a third one coming up with Robert Monell, and we're going to be talking about cult films on that one. But I was devastated when Vince left us, and it really, really hit me hard, and because he was such an inspiration, like you said, he really, just his mellow demeanor, and he was so calm, and he was just funny. I mean, I don't even think he realized how funny he was.
Right. It's just the way he got criticized a few times. Emails, people would say he's talking too mellow. He's got that voice that carries on, and I was like, well, wait a minute, that's him. He's being himself. He's not trying to be anybody else. Who doesn't want to be? And just by his nature of the way he talked and he laughed and he shared his knowledge of the movies that he loves and that we all like, really intrigued a lot of people. And, Nick and myself, we added on to the subject matter and the conversation with that. So it was really a lot of fun, has been. And a lot of the shows, some of these shows were amazing. We did episode 100, which was the B-Movie Cast backyard party. And we had a lot of invites and guests. And if you listen to that episode, it's the episode called the Dr. X.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. The Dr. X and the Return of Dr. X.
Yeah.
That particular episode, it was amazing. And, and then every, episode 200 and then 300. And believe it or not, the last episode that we did, Roger, before Vince passed, was The Body Snatchers. In other words, it was a Mexican horror film of the Body Snatchers. So, and we had a special guest on that show. Roberto Bob Carter was a special invite to be on the show with us to do the Body Snatchers. And Bob Carter passed away a few years ago too, but he was the author of that book that you got, the Mexican filmography of horror and Lucha Libre. That the book had Santo on the cover. Yep. He was the author of that book, and he joined us to do that very cast, the last one that we did. After that, Vince passed, and we didn't have him anymore. But we went on. It was episode, I think it was 368 or 367. If I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And so we went on, and I told Mary, I think Mary wanted to call it quits then after that, because she was too emotionally, she really felt it, and
yeah. Oh yeah.
She says, I don't know if I can continue to do this anymore, because I don't know Vince works the computers and, the board and everything. And she was just on the side as a background there in all the shows. She would be there, and every once in a while she would say something, but it was primarily Vince, Nick, and myself as the commentators. And she didn't know if she can do it. And Nick, Nick and I talked to her, and we got to give it a try. If your heart says you have to do it, you want to keep the legacy going, keep it going. I'm sure that he's resting in peace, and he sees what's happening, and he'll be a happy spirit.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's what happened. So I'm thank you for letting me know. I mean, there's a lot of other people that I can mention. If I don't mind, I like to mention Rich Chamberlain.
Oh yeah,
he was another listener that was with us, and for many, many years. As a matter of fact, he started out in the very early beginnings of the podcast, in the very first, under 100 episodes, and I think episode in the 20s or the 30s, he was already a voice. He was calling in and leaving voicemails.
Right, I remember that.
And Richard Chamberlain happens to have his own blog. He's got the Monster Movie Kid blog, and there was another gentleman that also Monster Kid Radio. Derek Cook.
Yep.
He was an avid before he was into the zombie stuff,
Yeah.
And his name was Brother D.
Right.
If you remember him as Brother D, but he would come on and he would do shows with us, and he would call in and do voicemail. And he also mentioned Vince as an inspiration to him to go on and do his Monster Movie Radio show.
Right.
So you see, there's a lot of podcasters that really, that have to say, tributed Vince to being what they're at today, and they're really happy and glad about that. And they always, from the bottom of their hearts, they thank Vince Bertolo for the inspiration.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had Derek on the show a few times. I was on his show once, and he's also been on my other show, The East Meets the West. So we're all kind of like this little collective group, almost like you said, almost like a family, And I like that, you're here. I appreciate that, because that makes me feel like I'm part of the club,
Thank you. You are.
Awesome. And one thing I wanted to mention to you too, because you mentioned that you were into silent movies. If you want to check out episode 99 of Then Is Now podcast, we had this guy on, David Mish. We've had him on a few times. He used to write for Mork and Mindy and Police Squad. And he goes around and lectures about the life of Buster Keaton. And we did a whole show about Buster Keaton.
Oh,
so
wow.
Yeah, it was episode 99, so you have to check it out. Okay,
I'll tune that in. Absolutely. Buster Keaton, he's one of my faves. I mean, I have quite a few, a huge collection of Buster Keaton films from the silent era. I'm talking about when Buster Keaton, back in the 1915, 16, 17, when he was doing the silence with Fatty Arbuckle, Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle.
Right.
And even into the early 20s. And of course, his demise later on in the late 20s when sound came into play, MGM, he kind of, he got really messed. They messed him up really bad, after getting out of silence. But he went on to continue doing. He thought he couldn't make it in the talkies, but he did.
Yep.
And Keaton is amazing. He even started doing. He was doing the beach movies. He was doing horror films. The Roger Corman. I mean, he did a little bit of everything. He was even on the Twilight Zone, believe it or not. Buster Keaton. So yeah, he's one of my faves. I'll listen to that episode.
Okay, cool. All right, so folks, today we've got a special double feature for you. We're going to be talking about not one, but two Mexican horror films. As Juan mentioned, The World of the Vampires from 1961 and The Empire of Dracula from 1967. So sit back and get ready to learn about a couple of great films that you may not have heard of before. Class is in session. So, folks, this is a rather short one. Normally, our synopses are a lot longer and a little bit more detailed, but I couldn't find very many online, so this is how the film goes. Many years ago, vampires attempt to kill off humans, but were prevented by a man named Coleman. Now, vampire Count Sabotai seeks revenge by killing the remaining members of the Coleman family lineage, an old man and his nieces. However, when family friend Rodolfo is wounded in an attack by Sabotai, he discovers an unusual way to fight back against the vampires, a special musical tone played on a piano. So, Juan, when did you first see this, and what was your first impression of
I was really amazed. I first saw this film, oh my God, this must have been easily maybe 18 years ago, about 18 years ago. And, I was amazed because, I was intrigued basically by El Vampiro, which is that was one of the main vampire films that came out in 1957. But, then they started doing more and more and more, besides that one, they had continuous vampire films, the follow-up to El Vampiro, The Vampire's Coffin. And then, but then when this film came into play in 1961, and this was basically the same year, believe it or not, that the Brainiac was out. And, of course, the Brainiac was a year later in 61, 62. But the inspiration there on the set of the Brainiac, I watched the Brainiac, and I said, oh, my God, wait a minute. And there was a like a drive-in double feature thing, and they had The World of the Vampires and the Brainiac together. I said, wow, I wonder why. And lo and behold, it was because of the fact that a lot of the sets on this film, on The World of the Vampires, happens to be the same sets that were on the Brainiac.
Oh, okay.
Yes, if you look closely in the opening shots, when Count Subotai is walking through the castle, that castle supposedly is the mansion that that the Brainiac was in, the same mansion. And in the woods, the forest, the beginning, when he first the two get sabotaged in the car and everything, that foggy scenery, the atmosphere, that was the same when in the Brainiac when he landed. So I mean, a lot of the you look at the things, and except for the cave sequences, but I really was intrigued to the fact that you could always kill a vampire with a stake. You could kill him with a cross. You could kill him with garlic. You could kill him, with all different things, okay? Sunlight, okay?
Yeah.
But the idea of having music to destroy a vampire, wait a minute, this is really intriguing. So I watched it, and I really liked it. It's different, for the fact being that this is a particular vampire film where, his women, Count Subotai's vampire clan women, were beautiful, sexy, cladded ladies that were, wow, you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
But the men, the vampire guys, were all hideous, deformed creatures.
Right.
They were not good-looking vampire guys. So I guess he wanted to have his vampire women looking good all the time for him. But I was intrigued about that, and then the fact that if you look at a lot of the vampire films, this particular film, what got to me was the fact of the use of the fangs. Now, if you look at, Count Subotai, and Subotai is kind of like a weird name for, the lead head vampire.
Right.
We know Dracula, we know Dracul, we know Alucard, we know, all these different, vampire names, maintaining the Dracula, name, like spelled backwards or whatever, but never Subotai. And I guess Subotai, I went on to do a little further research, meaning that his ancestors back in 300 years ago or 150 or 200 years ago were the clan that were running around. The counts, they were called Subotai, that clan family. And, basically the Colemans, there was a generation of Colemans 300 years ago that were like, quote unquote, Van Helsing type characters that were going around trying to destroy all these vampire clans 150, 200 years ago. So that's the reason why, Subotai has come back, all these centuries. And I guess it's a revenge story.
Right.
And it follows the plot of the Brainiac, because the Brainiac is also a revenge story, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And he comes back in the 16th century in a comet, and he lands, and now he's taking revenge against those that did him wrong back then, that sent him to be crucified or burned at the stake. So now Subotai is doing the same thing, but
Right.
he's targeting only the Coleman family, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
Because the Coleman family, they're the heirs of the original ones that destroyed his I guess his parents, his clan, back 150, 200 years ago.
Right.
So the story has a pretty good plot. Taking it back, saying, well, you know what, there is a plot where there's a reason why he's going after only the Colemans, and there's only 3 descending Colemans left,
Yeah.
which was, of course, the 2 nieces and the older man in the film. Okay.
Yeah.
So I tell you, I mean, it got to me, and I said, well, this is pretty cool, but keep in mind, I watched the Spanish version of this, because I wanted to see, and the Spanish version is very, you can hear their voices, and you can hear the characters and Guillermo Muray and all these guys in their original voices. But then, of course, when the 60s rolled around, guess who wanted to take this film and dub it into his form to make an English version of the film? And he did. That was K. Gordon Murray.
Right.
So this is how this particular film went on to become a late night favorite back in the 60s and 70s. So as an English dub version with his own, creating his own dubbing, and, having people working out of the Sound Lab studios in Coral Gable, Florida. They're sitting in there and then doing all the editing and the dubbing for the original voices to the characters of this film. And I tell you what, it worked. I mean, it's bad dubbing, but I have both versions, the Spanish and the English dub. And every once in a while I watch the English dub, and then I like going back to the Spanish version, with the subtitles, but I don't need the subtitles anyway, and watch the film over. This is a movie that you can watch again and again because of the attention to details throughout the entire film.
Oh, absolutely.
So, yeah, I mean, the theme of the film, basically, when it intrigued me, when it involved music, of all things, there was no sunlight involved. There was nothing with, particular steaks that you needed to have, or you needed to put garlic and this and that to prevent. It was, I guess, maybe back then, the Subotai clan back in the 16th, 17th century were fanatics of music. And they love organ music, and they played this organ pipe music, which led to him having his own personal skull and bones organ, if you know what I mean.
Right.
I got a huge kick out of that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this was my first viewing, and there were definitely elements that seemed familiar to me, so I think I may have actually caught it on late night TV back in the 70s. But I ended up watching the YouTube version, so the quality of the print wasn't that great. But I didn't mind the dubbing, and now that you said that K. Gordon Murray did it, that makes sense because the voice actors sounded familiar to me. So
yeah, these were character actors that K. Gordon Murray used over and over again.
Yeah,
he had them. He used them for this film. He used them for the Brainiac. He used them for the Living Head. He used them for, I mean, all the ones that he did that he was able to get dubbed over into English. The swamp, the Lake of the Swamp Monster was another one. That was the Western version of Peach from the Black Lagoon.
right.
He did the dubbing on that one too. So I mean, but he picked a lot of the real good ones, and of course, he knew that the Salazar brothers, Abel Salazar and Alfredo Salazar, were huge instrumental factors in creating the APSA production company back in the 50s, which led to doing all of these horror films. Everything tied into Abel and Alfredo Salazar.
Right.
And of course, they're behind this film too. Abel Salazar and Alfredo are behind the making of this film also. Though it was Alfonso Corona Blake who directed the film, who went on, believe it or not, he went on to do Santo versus the Vampire Woman. He directed that one.
Right.
Because I guess the atmosphere was just right. You know what I mean? So being the fact that it was the Salazar brothers, they wanted to keep it, that theme, that real atmospheric, how do you call it, universal type feel to the film.
Right.
You see what I mean? Though this didn't really have a universal type feel to it per se, but some of the other ones that he did kind of like had that feeling. So that's why he couldn't do all of them, but he did a lot of the good ones that we like. And he dubbed it. K. Gordon Murray dubbed it into English. So, but the Spanish versions, believe it or not, Roger, a lot of the fans still want the Spanish versions. They want to hear what their original voices are, like in the Santo films.
Yeah.
A lot of my Santo films, they want me, I want the Spanish version with the English subtitles. I want to hear Santo's original voice. I don't want to hear a dubbing. I don't want to hear an English dubbed version. And I guess by now what's happening, that there's a company that's doing English dub versions of the Santo films. They're releasing them now on Blu-ray. So and the dubbing is not good. It doesn't kind of like match them. I mean, it's synchronized dubbing, but better than the K. Gordon Murray, I got to say that. But it's still not quite the same when say, well, what is Santo's voice really like? Or what is Mauricio Garces, who plays Rudy in this film, what is his voice like?
Right.
Or even the Count Subotais original voice, what does he sound like? So this is an intrigue thing that the fans, mostly the ones that are really into the actual Spanish versions of these films, they'd rather see them and hear their voices originally.
Yeah. I find I like both. I like subtitled stuff, and I like watching in English. For me, with the subtitles, it all depends on how tired I am. If it's later in the evening or at night and I want to put a movie on, I may choose not to watch a subtitled one, only because I have a hard time paying attention because I'm so tired.
Wow. Yeah.
But so Alfonso Blake also did Santo in the Wax Museum, which I saw recently. Yes,
he did that one too. Keep in mind that these writers, these directors, and these producers, they crossed over a lot they stayed with the subject matter, being lucha libre or the Mexican horror. So, I mean, this is not a new thing to them. I think I discussed that back when we did the Fright Lounge cast.
Yes.
And, I talked about how they crossed over and they directed 2 or 3 of the films, and they wanted to continue doing them. And then they stayed with it because they knew that there was a huge market back in Mexico at the time. I mean, these films were shown in theaters, but then they went off the circuit and never shown again. Right. So a lot of the, it was a thing that went out of phase in the 70s. And already when Santo passed away in 84, I mean, after that, it was just practically gone, showing horror films. And a lot of these stars were already, mostly a lot of them passed. So they were of age, too old to even do any sequels or any remakes of any of these films. Right. I would have loved to seen a sequel to the Brainiac or a remake, yeah. a good one I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But, that never came to be, but I mean, because of the fact that, you got the Salazar brothers, they just wanted to do one-shots and keep the fans hungry, which is, of course, the Brainiac and El Vampiro being the 2 main huge films that left major impacts on the fans, if you know what I mean.
Right. Didn't Alfredo Salazar write The Wrestling Women versus the Aztec Mummy?
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
He did. He wrote that one. And, I mean, he did a lot of stuff. I mean, there's a movie, actually a movie that he actually is in and gets killed
wow.
by none other than a vampire. But not a vampire, but a werewolf.
Oh, jeez.
And it's called Riders of the Skull, El Charro de las Calaveras. I don't know. Have you ever seen that?
No.
Well, you need to watch that one, Roger.
Okay.
Because Alfredo Salazar, he's like a campesino. He's like a farmer. And he's walking along the countryside, and here comes this werewolf. The movie is, I don't want to get off the subject matter here too much.
That's fine.
But the movie involves a Zorro type character. They call him El Chaco, the writer. And he's the rider of the skulls because he wears this Zorro outfit. He has a mask, and he's on his horse, and he rides the countryside, and he battles evil. He battles supernatural beings. And in this particular movie, The Riders of the Skull, he actually fights a lot of different monsters in this movie. And there was a werewolf, there was a vampire, there was a witch, there was a zombie, there was a headless horseman, there was a head in a box, there was, I mean, you name it, and it was in this movie. It was a Western. and I think I talked about this back at Fright Lounge, that Mexico was doing a lot of Western horror films in the late 50s and early 60s
Right.
that were really great. I mean, they're amazing films. And maybe in the future, if you want to get into a cast and do a show on Western horror, I would love to do that. But anyway, the film Riders of the Skull, Alfredo Salazar has a guest appearance in it. And I mean, he does get kicked off by the vampire. He comes and he bites him, and there he is laying on the ground. But that was Alfredo Salazar. He was also in the. He wanted to be in the film, so I guess that was his fame to glory, getting killed by a vampire.
Nice. That's awesome. And one of the other writers on this, because there was three writers. There was, and I'm gonna, but forgive me for not being able to pronounce the names correctly, but Ramon Obon was one of them. Alfredo Salazar and Jesus Murcielago Velasquez. Is that correct? Is that how you say it?
Yeah. You're right. That's it. Well, basically, I got to tell you, when we're talking about the director and the writers, okay, Ramon Obon, believe it or not, okay, Ramon Obon, who was a writer and a director up until he passed away in 65, 64. He was born in the early 1900s, 1918, 1917, around there. And he was instrumental in doing a lot of these Western horror films. If you look at the filmography of Ramon Obon, I mean, he did stuff like the La Sombra Vengadora, which is a wrestler. It's called the Shadow Avenger. He did 100 Cries of Terror, which is a horror film. He did a lot of these Westerns with the Zorro type characters in them. Like, for example, The Vengeance of the... oh my God. There's so many of them, okay? He did El Mascarado de Plata, which was the first Santo film from 53 that was a serial. That was Ramon Obon. I mean, he did the Mil Mascaras, the very first Mil Mascaras movie that came out. He did that one. I mean, and then, of course, he went on to do the La Loba. La Loba was a she-wolf movie, which is really good, by the way. And he did a lot of film. Ramon Obon is he's been doing films for many years. I would say about 40 to 45 years. But a lot of them in the late 50s and in the early 60s were Western horror ones involving masked Western writers. El Mascarado Justiciero was one of them. I mean, there were so many of them that La Máscara de Hierro, the Man in the Iron Mask, which is a Western version of the Man in the Iron Mask, that also had a vampire in it, believe it or not.
Right.
So Obon was very creative and wanted to have, he had El Zorro meets the Diligent Phantom. His name was the Zorro Escarlata. I have a few of the films. The Living Coffin, if you remember that one. Okay, Ramon Obon was also involved with that film. So there was a lot of them. The Vampire's Coffin, a lot of horror movies. His beginning, he started back out in the 30s or in the 40s. And even then, he was doing a lot of dramas. He was doing a lot of comedy. But he decided to get into the horror genre after seeing, that the Salazar brothers wanted to get involved. And of course, there was the great legendary Chano Urieta. That's another one that's also involved with a lot of this. But Alfonso Corona Blake is the three that we talk about here, which was Ramon Obon and Alfredo Salazar. I'd say much about Salazar. He was born. This guy is amazing because him and his brother, I guess this is since they were very, very young, had a passion for doing horror. I guess maybe they watched the early horror films of the 30s in Mexico, La Llorona, and some of these other films that came out in the early 30s and the 40s, and they got the inspiration to wanted to do that. So, but Alfredo and both Abel and Alfredo, they both wrote, they produced, they directed, and they acted in the majority of the films.
Wow.
Can you believe that?
No, that's amazing.
To have that happen, need I say much? But you mentioned Jesus Murcielago Velasquez, all right?
Yes.
Now, that guy right there, believe it or not, he was born in Hidalgo, Mexico. and he was a writer and actor, and his films were kind of like more dramatic. He did a lot of drama films, more dramatic and kind of romantic films and period films. But then his filmography also included doing some of the Santo films.
Yeah.
He did. I think he did Santo and the Rider of Terror.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I think you mentioned it on Fright Lounge, and that one sounds really good. I want to see that one.
So Santo and the Rider of Terrors.
Yeah.
Versus the Rider. Yeah, that's a Western.
Yeah.
It's kind of Santo doing a Western, and he doesn't have his cape, he doesn't have his tights, but he does have a typical Western. He has a shirt, a plaid shirt, and he rides around in a horse, and it's really good. It's about lepers. It's supposedly leopards. They go and terrorize the countryside. So yeah, and Jesus Murciélago Velázquez was involved in directing, producing also that film, and many, many other films. I mean, his list goes on. Did you know he did Blue Demon films?
Yes, I saw that in his filmography, yes.
Yeah, he did some Blue Demon films, and I mean, too many. In a comedy. He also was involved with the Mexican wrestling women. He did a couple of the Lucha Libre with the female wrestlers. The She-Wolves of the Rings and the Mexican women wrestling films. There's a film that is called El Señor Tormenta, Mr. Storm. Okay, this movie is from 1963, and he was involved with that film, which is basically a great film, and it involves a luchador in there. It's called Mr. Storm. He's kind of like a Santo wannabe type of character, Mil Mascaras. But he did this film, and believe it or not, one of the characters in that film, in Señor Tormenta, I gotta add, is Mr. Eric del Castillo, who is the actor in the second film that we're going to be doing, The Empire of Dracula.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. I mean, and so on and on and on with Jesus Murciélago Velázquez. Now, there's another, I mean, the storyboards was done by, he was a writer, and he did a lot of the storyboards. His name is Raúl Centeno, and he's a writer-director. He did a lot of the rock. Have you ever heard of the Rocambole series?
No.
From the 60s. Okay, I'm going to add on to that here. The Rocambole series is actually, if you remember back in the 50s, they used to have the serials of the 50s. The chapter serial plays of the 50s. I don't know if you heard of a serial called The Spy Smasher.
Yes, I have.
You have?
Yeah.
Have you ever seen it?
A long time ago. It's been a while. I don't really remember.
Okay. Well, the movie Rocambole is actually taken from it's a Spy Smasher type serial, not a serial, but movies. There was 3 films made, and Rocambole looks like Spy Smasher, but he wears a cape and he wears a mask. And he's going around destroying, catching spies, and it's more likely, it's not horror, but it's more likely like an action adventure spy type thing. And Raúl Centeno, he directed, and he was behind doing the Rocambole series, which only led to 3 films. It's sad that it didn't continue like the Neutron series or any of the Santo films,
right?
But they would have been pretty good because, I mean, a lot of people don't know about Rocambole. So, I mean, I just thought I'd throw that in there on that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So let's jump into the cast a little bit here. And then, Juan, you can give us your expertise on everyone. I wanted to ask you, so Guillermo Murray played Sabotai. And isn't that Bill Murray in Spanish?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Kind of. It's Guillermo Muray. In Spanish, is Muray.
Muray, okay.
Muray, yeah, Guillermo Muray. Guillermo is Guillermo Muray. And it is Bill, Bill Murray. It is. It's kind of like funny that you mentioned that. I mean, because the man, I tell you what, he's quite an actor. He was. Believe it or not, he's not Mexican. He wasn't Mexican. Guillermo Muray was Argentinian.
Oh wow!
He came from a descendant Argentinian family from Argentina, and he was born in the city of Colón, Argentina, back in the 1920s. So he became an actor, and he was a writer, and he was known. I mean, he did a lot of stuff from the 50s, 60s, 70s. He went all the way at acting into the 90s, believe it or not. And he just recently passed away.
Yeah.
Guillermo Murai died about a year ago. Maybe
Yeah,
a year
last year, and he was 93 years old.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing?
It is.
I mean, I tell you, I got the opportunity, and I want to add to this, and we're talking about the cast a little bit, that I have the opportunity to meet Herman Robles in person. I mean, Herman Robles, who was El Vampiro, came to the Monster Bash. I don't know how Ron did it. He was able to get him to come to the Monster Bash. And it would have been awesome if they would have had maybe not just Robles, but would have invited a couple of other, like Guillermo Murai,
Right.
or invited a couple of other actors. But at the time when Herman Robles was very frail, he passed. Murai was in his late 80s, already. So he couldn't travel, maybe, because I did mention to Ron trying to get some other actors from the films back in the 50s, besides Robles, get one or two more. But I've been trying to get Lorena Velasquez to come to the Monster Bash, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
And Lorena Velasquez, and she was the vampire woman in Santo versus the Queen.
Right.
And for the, Ron Adams really wanted to have her, but she's a tough person to get. She's got contracts in Mexico, and she's still doing soap operas to this day in Mexico.
Wow.
So you see a lot of these actors, and I got to say, Guillermo Murai, he went on to do stuff, but there was a time in a period in his life when he just stopped. I mean, because he had a family man, he was married, but he did stuff up all the way up until I think the early 2000s, 2010, 11, and he was still doing films. So he was very active in the circuit, doing a lot of soap operas. I mean, a lot. He did. If you look in Mexican soap operas, you see him in tremendously throughout the 80s and throughout the 90s. He went on to do a lot of soap operas, and he's a very familiar face. Like Days of Our Lives. You get to see the character for 15 or 16 years. There's Guillermo Murai in all these different soap operas, and there he is. He became a character actor in soaps after he got out of doing the films. And what led from his monster, doing horror films, led on to do Western films, because he loved Westerns and he wanted to have a career doing Western films. So he started doing those. And he also, believe it or not, he did religious films too.
Huh.
He did a few religious films. He did the life of Jesus Christ in 1980, and then he did the Nativity in 2011, I think it was.
Wow.
And before that, he did quite a few biblical films. He had a fascination to do biblical films besides being a vampire, of course.
Right.
But I mean, his career, he's got an amazing filmography. And I got to say, it goes many, many years. Every year he was very active. Some years he would be doing 5 and 6 and 7 films in 1 year, believe it or not. He was nonstop. And I guess the horror films came to an end, I think, in the late 60s, or after he did this film, he did a couple of other films, and that was pretty much the end of it. But he enjoyed doing the 2 films that he liked to do. I mean, I want to mention these 2 films, the Gigantic Planetariums, which is a science fiction film that he did, that led to the follow-up of The Planet of the Female Invaders, which was Lorena Velasquez in 1966. So those 2 films, Guillermo Murai was very instrumental in doing those. He liked it. The Gigantic Planetariums was it has UFOs, it has space, it has astronauts, it has planets, and it's a pretty good movie, actually,
Yeah.
And of course, The Planet of the Female Invaders, it's a typical story of the Ship of Monsters type movie, where you got these women, female invaders that come to Earth that want to populate the Earth with the women and take over the men, get the men. And I guess the same plot line like they did for the Ship of Monsters,
That's funny.
But yeah, it is. So, I mean, Murai, I think Murai, if I'm not mistaken, he was in the film too, one of the Neutron films. He was in the movie Neutron Traps the Invisible Killers.
Okay.
And it was the final film that Neutron did. It wasn't a credited per se film, but his character he had a different outfit, a different mask, and he wore a cape. And it's called Neutron Traps the Invisible Killers. I have that in the collection of the Neutron with the last films that he did versus the Karate Killers and the Invisible Killers. So Guillermo Moray is in that film along with Herman Robles, believe it or not.
Huh. Wow.
You know, so and again, you know, Murray, he did a couple of vampire films because he did this one, and then he went on to do Los Murciélagos, which was the vampires in '64, and I guess his character as a vampire, he did another movie called La Huella Macabre, which was the hideous face. And he was like, he came back from the dead. He was like a zombie type character with a hideous face, and he would seek women and get their blood to get eternal youth. He would drink. He was like a vampire, but he wasn't a vampire where he sucked the blood out of the women.
Right.
He would drink it, and he would keep his eternal youth. Similar to like the other movie that was there, the La Marca de la Muerte, the Mark of Death. So Maury was in that one in '63, which was a couple of years after he did this one. And then after that, he went on to do all the other stuff. But he wasn't really in a lot of horror films. He did only the few, you know, just to get that credit in there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And one thing, you mentioned the origin of the name Subotai. When I looked it up, I came up with that was the name of Genghis Khan's chief strategist, too.
Yeah.
So I wonder if there's a connection there. You know, he's a long-lived vampire. Maybe he did work for Genghis Khan.
That could be a good possibility to that. Yeah, I mean, you know, keep in mind that these of course, you know, you got an excellent cast of producers, writers, and the director. That you know, three minds always work better than one.
Right.
So they figure, well, you know, we'll do the research on this, and maybe we can tie it in with an actual historical character. So maybe, yeah, that's a good point there. Maybe it is a tie-in to, you know, the Genghis Khan clan back in the 16th, 17th century, you know?
Yeah, exactly. So moving on, and again, Juan, forgive me if I butcher some of these names. Mauricio Garces played Rudolph.
Mauricio Garces.
Mauricio Garces, okay.
Yeah, Mauricio Garces is his name, and he's not a stranger to films. He's also a very known character actor. You see him in plays. Of course, he already passed. He passed away, I think, in 89, 88.
Yeah.
And but he was born in the 20s, and he's another one that born in Mexico. He's Mexican, and I gotta tell you, his character for a lot of the movies that he did, but one of the most renowned films that he was known for, besides the Brainiac, because he was in the Brainiac, was a movie called Don Juan from 1967.
Yeah, I have that in my notes here.
Huh?
I have that written in my notes here.
Yeah. Basically, you know, Don Juan and Mauricio Garces. You know, he was a stage man. He did theater. He did so many things, you know, before he went into films. And I guess he passed away in the Distrito Federal in Mexico. But he went on to do stuff all the way until the 80s. I would have to say, I don't know. I don't think he didn't make it to the 90s, but I mean, he went up into doing stuff in the 80s. And but he did tons and tons of comedy. Now, this is a guy that liked to do the sexy comedy movies.
Right.
In Mexico, they call them picardía. They call them picardía films, where it's like sexy comedies where they show a little bit of breasts. They show, you know, they don't really get into actual doing, you know, sex, but they do show, you know, breasts. But he loved to do those films, and he was always that Mr. Playboy character in all these movies. And they were comedies. But they were like call them picardías, you know, because they were like sexy comedies. And he did a lot of those, and people kind of like took to liking him for those.
Yeah.
Than any other stuff that he did, because there was one that he did called El Modisto de Señoras, in '69, and that was hilarious. It was a funny film. He was trying to hit on all these babes, these women, but he didn't want one. He wanted all of them. So he was. I don't know if you remember a movie called with Jerry Lewis, okay, that he tried to play different characters.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and he was always trying to get different women, and he was already involved with one woman, but he wanted to get them all.
Right.
But he played different character actors. Forgot the name of the movie, but anyway, in this movie, Modisto de Señoras, Mauricio Garces was the same character, and it was really funny because he, besides being the serious side of him, and you see him in this movie, he was pretty darn serious.
Yeah, and he kind of resembled Clark Gable, I thought.
Yeah, so they say he had that look, that real how do you call it, that appearance.
Yeah,
that he did resemble Gable in many ways. Not to confuse him with Gable, but anyway.
Yeah.
But the Garces was instrumental in horror films, actually, because the Salazar brothers and the other directors and writers wanted him to go on to do a couple more because he was really good. He was good in this film, and then from this movie led on to do the Brainiac. It was the next one that followed up, where he came back. He was a forensic surgeon in the Brainiac, if you remember.
Yeah.
And he went on to do that. Before the Brainiac, he did a couple of films. One of them called it Jinete Negro, which was the Black Rider. He loved to do westerns too, and he did a lot of westerns. And so basically, his career spans. Oh my God! He was in the movie La Llorona. Are you familiar with the 1960 version of La Llorona?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, that movie right there, Mauricio Garces was also in that film of La Llorona from 1960.
Oh,
okay.
Wow.
Yeah, he was one of the counts in the film. I think his name was Felipe or something like that. But he just, and then after that he went back and forth. Garces crossed over so many times between films. He didn't do 2 or 3 or 4. He did one horror, one western, one romance, one comedy, like that. He was like flipping back and forth. But he was really pretty well known. He did a western movie called Apache Vengeance right after he did La Llorona. And it was a really good western, man, with the Apaches and Indians and cowboys. And he was a cool cowboy in that,
Nice.
But anyway, yeah. So Mauricio Garces is a very well-known actor throughout the years of his life. And you got to credit the guy because he started back. He started way back. I think he started in the early 50s. He did start it in the early 50s. And
Nice.
He went on to do many, many films. And he's well known in Mexico. He did comedy with Resortes, and he did a lot of, the Pica Pica films, the Picardía movies, the sexy comedies. He was with Clavillazo. He did a movie with Clavillazo, which was the Castle of Monsters, from the cast, the comedian that was in the Castle of Monsters, called El Joven de Carrito, the man with the little car. I think it was from 58 or 59. So you see, Garces crossed over tremendously into many, many different genres of films. So he was a very, very well-known actor, and very well liked in Mexico for his films.
Nice. And just as a side note here, I think wasn't The Family Jewels the Jerry Lewis movie you were thinking of?
That's the one.
Yeah. It took me a while for it to come to me.
Yeah, that's the one. Right.
He played 6 or 7 characters in that?
Yeah, he played about 7 different characters, just trying to romance all these women, know. And his girlfriend, who was a psychiatrist, he said, well, let me disguise myself as this guy, that guy, a cowboy.
Right.
He was even a cowboy. But it was very funny. And Mauricio Garces did the same thing in Modisto de Señoras. It was the same exact thing that he did, trying to hit on all these women, but he had to change his disguise and play different roles to try to get to them,
Right. So just want to wrap up the cast here a little bit. I did want to mention that Erna Martha Bauman played the character Martha, and as you mentioned, the movie La Llorona in 1960, she was in that, and she was also in Invasion of the Vampires in 63. What can you tell us about her?
Okay, she was actually Leonor in this film.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I got this off of Wikipedia, so it's wrong.
Yeah, no, Erna Martha Baumann was Lenore. She
Okay.
was the one that got convinced, and she decided to go with the Count Subotai and be his vampire queen, I
Okay,
guess,
right. Yeah.
Yeah, So yeah, she actually, I mean, Erna Martha Baumann she was born in Mexico, and she was an actress that was known for basically, she was in La Llorona.
Yeah.
She was also in the movie of the La Llorona from 1960. But where she came into play, besides doing this, she did a lot of wanted to do quite a few vampire films. She was one that was uncredited called The Vampire Hookers from '78, and then she did some comedy with Viruta and Capolina, in the early '70s.
Okay.
But she did a film with Viruta and Capolina, which is two comedians. They're the Mexican versions of Abbott and Costello. Okay,
Okay.
these two guys called Viruta and Capolina, and she did quite a few films with them because I guess she liked comedy, and she besides this film, I mean, she was really the Invasion of the Vampires was the other film where she was actually one of the Frankenhausen family clans, Brunhilde,
Yeah.
in the Invasion of the Vampires, and then she was also in the Bloody Vampire, the original. Those are two vampire films that I didn't talk about that I thought I was going to do. Instead of doing these two, I was going to do the Bloody Vampire and the Invasion of the Vampires. But because their sequel, one led to a sequel, it would be like almost like one film, the continuation into the other.
Right.
So I wanted to have two different films all together, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
That's the reason why I didn't do the Bloody Vampire and the Invasion of the Vampires. But Erna Maltha, she was with both Vampire, the Bloody Vampire, and the Invasion of the Vampires, which came out in '62 and '63.
Nice.
So she followed this movie, led on to the Bloody Vampire, and then into the Invasion of the Vampires. So, and then before this, of course, was La Llorona, and then after that, she was also in quite a few films in the 1950s. She did about 3 or 4 films in the the early 50s. Did you know? I got to tell you that she was also Mixed Mexico Universe from 1956.
Oh wow!
Followed by 1957, Lorena Velasquez, she was Mixed Mexico in 1957, and Erna Martha was Mixed Mexico in 1956.
Oh wow, that's great.
Well, actually, she became the semi-finalist, but I mean, she was a beautiful woman. Let me tell you.
I was just gonna say, yeah. So,
yeah.
What do you want to say about if you want anything about the rest of the cast here?
Well, maybe let me see.
We've got Sylvia Fournier, Alfredo Barón, Jose Baviera.
I would like to talk about Jose Baviera. Because Jose Baviera, man, this guy he played Mr. Coleman.
Yes,
he was the guy. He was, and Baviera, like many actors that in Mexico that you think they're Mexican, they're really not. They come from different countries internationally: Argentina, Spain, Portugal, Brazil, and they go to Mexico because that's where they make it big. But right. I mean, Jose Baviera was actually a Spanish gentleman that is born in Spain, and he's Spanish descent. He's from Valencia, and his main role, you got to watch a movie that he's really known for, was actually a film that was done here, an American film. It's called The Exterminating Angel. I don't know if you're familiar with that film.
I've heard the title.
Have you heard of it?
I've heard the title. Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen it.
Oh, you have to see that film. The Exterminating Angel. Jose Baviera was kind of like the lead in the film to bring the guest to the mansion. It's a really creepy film, man. And you know what? I got to say one thing. That movie got a Criterion release.
Oh, wow.
It did get a Criterion official release, The Exterminating Angel. And this happens to be one of Luis Buñuel's films. Buñuel, the Exterminating Angel. Okay. And it's a fantasy drama, and basically Baviera was like one of the main guests at this real upper dinner class party that they mysteriously find themselves unable to leave that room that they're in when they're having the dinner. They can't get out of the room. They're stuck in that room for like 3 or 4 days. And
Oh, wow.
Baviera is trying to, and Baviera is trying to tell them, oh no, there is a way out. They got trapped in that room, and all kinds of strange things happen. I mean, it's like, wow. It is kind of a very bizarre film, but Baviera is very, very good in it. So I'm going to recommend The Exterminating Angel. If you haven't seen it, look that one up. I think you'll enjoy that. That is a Mexican film, by the way, but
Okay.
it has English. It has English dubbing, and it has the subtitles to that one too.
And was that was in the 70s? Or was
No,
it?
The Exterminating Angel was in 1962.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So yeah, I definitely recommend that if you want to see. Leandro Gomez is the guy. He's like the lead character in the film with the guest, in that dinner party, and you get to see Baviera in action there. He's very, very good actor, very, very good actor. One of the other films that I wanted to talk real quick about him. Well, I mean, you see a lot of these older character actors in the '60s. They're already pretty old. But if you look at him back in the '50s and even in the '40s, because Baviera he started his filmography in the '40s. Jose Baviera was an incredible actor. I gotta hand it to him. This gentleman was actually in films in the silent era. I said the '30s, but he did go back to the '20s. He was doing silent films in the early '20s in Mexico, which was unknown, of course, unknown here in theater. He was doing films. In 1924, he started out, and he went up until he did quite a few films up until 1927, 28.
Wow.
And then in silent films. So there you go with him. And then he started doing his first talkies early on, and he went all the way through the 30s. He did interesting films in the 30s. He did a lot of romances. He did some dramas. And in 1942, he started doing more period films. He was doing historical films, biblical films. One of the ones that he did was Jesus of Nazareth. Of course, the topic of Jesus was huge in Mexico. Back in the 50s, they did during the Easter. There was a huge amount of Easter films that were religious films that were done, in black and white in the 50s. And they always picked the topic of Jesus in the film. So Baviera was actually in Jesus of Nazareth in 1942. And then he did some Westerns, and he did he started doing a lot of Westerns because he was always the typical ranchero, he was like the hacienda master in these films, and he had the beautiful daughters that they always try to hit on him, and they would have to have his permission to get to how do you call it, to go out with the daughters and
Right.
so forth. So, but anyway, and then he went on to do some dramas and did some. So actually, he did some police films too. In the '40s, in the late '40s, he did a movie that I really enjoyed called La Barraca, and it was from 1945, and it's like a pirate film.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if you ever heard of that or not,
No.
but yeah, they actually released it on Blu-ray with English subtitles and an English dub version. Believe it or not.
Wow.
It's called La Barraca, the barracks, but it's actually it's a pirate film, and and then he went on and to do a lot of stuff. But one of my favorite films that he did, which also I have the Blu-ray of it, it's an awesome film with Jose Baviera, is called La Otra, the Other, which is the Mexican version of Betty Davis's Dead Ringer.
Oh, okay.
You remember the movie? Remember Dead Ringer?
Yeah.
Well, La Otra happens to be the Mexican version of that with Dolores Del Rio. Okay, and she plays the dual role as identical twins, and it's very, very similar to Dead Ringers with Betty Davis, and Baviera has a lead role in that one too. I recommend that one, La Otra, which is another one that he did. And I mean, there's so many. You could only hit so many. He did a couple of Western. He did some Western Zorro type films.
Wow.
He did the Black Whip. That was one of my favorites too. The Black Whip from 1964, 63. And he did a couple of other ones that were like Zorro type films, always playing the big hacienda master. He was always the rancher, and he was the lead rancher, and he had like a lot of influence, and stuff like that. So yeah, that I just wanted to just add a little bit about him because he's got an extensive he's got over 200 titles to his credit in filmography, believe it or not.
Wow.
200 films. And he passed away in the 80s, early 80s or the mid 80s. I don't know. I know, but he was such a great character, And yeah, and that pretty much wraps up the cast here. The cast of actors. A lot of these other ones were like basically party guests and people that really they were like extras in the film.
Right.
They really didn't have any speaking parts. So the main characters, I mean, there was only the 3 or the 4 main ones, of course, that we covered. So that's it for the cast of El Mundo de los Vampiros.
Interesting. Yeah. And so, like, getting into the film a little bit too, I love the opening. I love the way first of all, he's very much like Dracula, even though he doesn't have Dracula's name, but it opens with him coming out of the coffin, and you've got the traditional dark and scary castle, heads right over to his organ, which is made of skulls and bones, and it was just a great way to open the film,
Exactly. So basically the theme with that is, there's a premise where he's got to go and he goes to the organ. I guess he's with number one. He wakes up all his undead beings, his slaves, the vampire women, the creature, the vampire men. That's like a wake up call for them. Wake up, come, reunite. But the thing about it is that I got off of that is because when he was playing the organ back in the time of his ancestors, the original Subutais back in the 16th or 17th century were musicians. They were a family of musicians, and they played the organ type instruments and pianos, and this is what he developed a passion for that. So I mean, if you do further research into that, this is basically where you find out why does he play the organ. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, there's another there's another film where it's a luchador, believe it or not, that does the same thing as Count Subutai in this film, and he goes to play an organ, and it's called The Shadow of the Bat. It's the Blue Demon.
Okay,
one.
yeah.
So if you watch The Shadow of the Bat, there's he's in a cave, and then he goes to play an organ. The same thing. He has that same thing about music. Well, I got to play an organ, and then he starts wrestling. He has these guys wrestle with him in the cave. It's really funny, but that's the Blue Demon film. If you haven't seen it, check that one out. It's called Shadow of the Bat.
Yeah, I saw that on one of the writer's credits, I think. Jesus wrote that, Shadow of the Bat.
Luis Sotomayor.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, I mean, the idea, also, too, you got to look at it this way. The directors and the writers and the producers of this particular film, they wanted to add a little bit of that feel, that genre of the old, again, Universal horror films. This, mind you, that who was another character that played the organ back in the silent film? It was the Phantom of the Opera, if you remember.
Yeah.
So I mean, the idea of having a creature of the undead start off that way to play maybe he's tributing his ancestors, but it's a wake up call to have his minions wake up and gather with him so he can let them know what his plans are to do, what he wants to do. But there's a good side and a bad side to that,
Yeah. Well, and that also, to me, looking back on it, that kind of ties in with Rudolph's whole thing about how music can affect people and animals. And, he was basically summoning, Subutai was summoning his minions using the music from the organ,
Mm-hmm. So you got to figure that Rodolfo, how did he know, or what was the musical? Again, this movie is really strange to the point that there was no stakes involved. Okay, there was no garlic, none of this stuff. The typical crosses that they use for vampires and sunlight. Though there is a scene in the film where sunlight does come into play a little bit. But it doesn't destroy the vampire. They just pull the shades and that's it,
Right.
But I mean, how do you call it? That opening sequence is amazing. The first 10 minutes of the film and he basically, there's just that going on, and all his minions come out, and of course I mentioned the beautiful women that that come out. All his vampire women clan are gorgeous, sexy looking vampires. And keep in mind, vampire women, Mexican vampire women of all these films have to look pretty, and they have to be bosom. They have to have big breasts, if you know what I mean. Look at Santo and the Treasure of Dracula.
Right.
That's another good example. Okay. So, I mean, but the men, they could be hideous creatures. They could look like bats. They could look like werewolves. They could look like anything else.
Yeah.
You know?
And I thought it was, well, first of all, I wanted to mention that the humanoid bat creatures that he turns the men into, I know I've seen them somewhere before. I don't know if it was like maybe pictures in Famous Monsters or something, or I did see this as a kid. So that kind of stuck in the back of my head. But one thing I thought was kind of interesting was he had these really long fangs, but when he stops that couple that are driving down the road at the very beginning of the movie, and he goes to bite the woman, his teeth look like they retracted, so he could actually open his mouth wide enough to bite her. I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, well, basically, there's got to be a plot to that. He's not going to really sink fangs into the actual person's neck. I mean, it was all part of the special effects and the props they used. They might have been retractable fangs where when he went to go on and you see him going down, but you'll never see the fangs himself sticking into the skin.
Right.
You know what I mean? You see he covers his mouth over the neck, but you would think by now, the fangs are already in there. But no, you're right. I mean, or they would pull the other thing was to pull the cape over them so they wouldn't see them, him sucking on the neck, biting.
Yeah,
biting, in other words.
I mean, his teeth were so long. There's no way he could have opened his mouth wide enough to bite her neck.
No, I'm just saying. I got to tell you, there's a film, and I want to just add on a little bit to this here. There's a Turkish film. It's actually the Turkish version of Dracula. It's called Dracula in Istanbul.
Huh.
It's from 1950, I think 53 or 54. It's a black and white version of the Bela Lugosi Dracula from 1931, the Universal. And that movie right there, Dracula in Istanbul, the Turkish Dracula.
Yeah.
That vampire that has the same wolf-like fangs like Guillermo Murai, like Count Subotai had in this film.
Oh, okay.
Very long, protruding fangs. They're sticking way down, outside of his mouth, down the bottom of the lips. And say, wow, he looks more like a werewolf more than a vampire. But the idea, that Herman Robles and Vampiro had the same thing, but his teeth didn't protrude that far down, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting. What I didn't understand though was, and I maybe you can explain this. So he bites the chick. There's the couple that he stops him from driving, and he bites her. And somehow it gives her the power to see through all of space and time. I didn't quite get that.
Well, there was a process to that. Basically, what happens was, if it was a ceremonial thing. It was a ceremonial thing where the women would bring out the woman, they would lay her on the table, and he had this dagger.
Right.
Okay. The dagger was part of the ceremony to complete the process of turning the woman into a vampire. So basically, he would actually bite the woman first, and he went down, he bite him, and then after he bites him, you can see the marks, and then he uses the dagger to complete the actual transformation. In other words, his bite wasn't actually making them into a full vampire yet. They needed to go to the second process of the transformation, which was the ceremonial dagger that he used to stab them in the neck, protrude the blood, and interact the blood with his bite mark, the blood from that. And therefore, he would say, rise, and you see everything heals. Right. The marks go away, the blood goes away, and now she's a vampire. Where she has she protrudes her fangs, and she can become a bat, a rubber bat, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Talk about that rubber bat, man. It's amazing. But anyway, that's how it's done. That's how they did the concept with that of transforming Subotai, transforming the women into vampires. That's how he did it. It was a two-step process.
Right.
In other words, just him biting on them alone wouldn't do it. He needed the dagger to complete the ceremony.
Okay, that makes sense. Because I was wondering, I'm like, if he's passing on his vampire power, wouldn't he have the power to see through time and space? But he probably, when he became a vampire, he didn't get stabbed by the magical knife there.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Remember, they didn't do a prologue of him back in the 16th or 17th century when his ancestors, when he was alive. How did he become a vampire? What led for him to become? What was there a ceremonial thing with dagger involved? Apparently there's a dagger involved. So was his great ancestor, his father, or his great grandfather get stabbed by a dagger and things like that? We don't know this, but you have to kind of like presume. You have to, create it in your mind, the story. What's with the dagger, if you know what I mean?
Right. Oh, man. So just moving through the story here, Rodolfo shows up at the party, and then, there's a party going on. I think it Coleman that was hosting the party?
Yes, it was Mr. Coleman.
Yeah.
It was him, and it was a bunch of guests, and it was like I guess it was a traditional party they have every year to celebrate something, there's a celebration, maybe music, because the party involved with Rodolfo being there. He was like the highlight of the party, and I guess his introduction to Rodolfo, and I guess Rodolfo is a pianist,
right?
He's a concert man. He plays musical pieces, classical musical pieces, and he enchants people like that, by playing his musical pieces, and people get mesmerized. So at the party, Mr. Coleman says, I'd like to introduce Rodolfo. He's going to play a number for you. And he starts playing and everything. So basically everybody's looking and say, wow, that is an enchanting piece. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's where the character of him comes into play. And I guess he's been doing this traditionally, comes to the party and does musical numbers on the piano for his guests to kind of like, say, wow, that's really beautiful.
Right. But this time around, he was showing them how his music can affect people, because I think the first piece he plays causes a dog in the distance to start barking, and then he's playing one, and what's his name, Subutai shows up, and it repels him, and that led to a great scene which I really loved. Like, well, first of all, the girl at the party she looks in the mirror on the wall and sees that Subutai doesn't have a reflection.
Exactly.
And then I think it was her. Was it her later on, like while the party's still going on, she's sleeping and a vampire comes into the room, one of the vampire creatures. But Rodolfo's playing away on the piano, and the music he uses not only repels Subutai, but the vampire in the other room, which I thought was great because they had no idea that had happened.
Exactly. So basically what it is, it's not that he presents that there was creatures or maybe there was demonic forces at play, but maybe the way he struck the keys on the piano, certain tones, upper tones, lower tones, high notes, lower notes, triggered something, the screeching that these creatures couldn't hear. It would affect them.
Right.
It would affect their brain. It would affect them. It was like a hideous thing. It was almost like a poison to them that would destroy them and kill them if they keep hearing that.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right. While that creature, that male creature vampire was trying to go in there and get to one of Coleman's nieces, Rodolfo's playing away, and he didn't know he was actually saving the girl in the room,
right?
Because the creature, he played the notes to the right tune, and I guess this is where when Subutai was there. And he's talking, and he said, "Well, this is a note that I mesmerized," and he started playing that particular hideous note that Subutai couldn't stand, and you could see, the agony in his face, and he's trying to, and it's trying to hurt him, and he's like to the point where, I got to get away from here. So basically, that was letting you know, okay, now Rodolfo has the secret, and he has the notes, the right notes that he has to hit to actually destroy, to affect, to repel the demonic demon that Subutai was as a vampire.
Right.
So yeah, and I said, wow, that's really interesting, because I never would have thought of music having to have an influence on a vampire.
And that's one of the things that I think makes this movie kind of special, is because no other film has ever done that, as far as I can tell.
No, this is the only one.
Yeah. So the chick was Lenore. She becomes the vampire, and
Yes.
she can teleport, which I thought was interesting.
Well, it's amazing because she can teleport. She can become into a giant rubber bat, fly
Yeah.
away, and even there's a scene in the film where she actually becomes a bat and she's hovering over the window and her head is on the bat.
Right. Did that remind you of that Three Stooges short called Spooks?
Yes, it did.
Where it had Shemp's head on the bat.
That was funny. But I mean, yeah, Lenore got mesmerized by the Count, and I guess, she was the one that let him out of the party, out of the room, and was gonna, take, walk with him to his carriage or whatever. And he, in the garden, he kind of like overtook her and he hypnotized her, and he says, I want you to join me and become one of the undead. And I guess she fell for it. She said, well, you know what? I think this might be a good thing. So yes, I'll do it. I'll become one of your women, one of your vampires. And he started to bite her because, again, the process was he was going to bite her, but he wasn't going to turn her into a full vampire yet because she had to go through the ceremony. Remember the ceremony with the dagger? She needed to go through that. So, but he didn't get to bite her. And then because Mr. Coleman came out, Mr. Bavier came out and started hollering for her, and, Lenore. And then he kind of like, boom, he vanished.
Right.
So he left it at that, but then he came back to do the job, and she actually wanted to be one of his minions.
Yes.
So, I mean, to the point where you have to volunteer yourself. You know how you can see if you force yourself not to be, and you say, no, you really can't, the vampire can't force you to, you voluntarily do it, then you fall into his grasp mentally, the hypnotism. So this is the part where he finally comes back for her, and he's in his coven, and he's calling her via mental, telepathy. Come. She gets up and goes through the forest, runs over there to him, and boom, it happens.
Yeah, exactly. They also had a hunchback character in this, which I thought he was very scary.
Yeah, he was the Re-Gor. Well, basically, he was the Re-Gor of the film.
Yeah.
Which actually, he went on to how do you call it? To become, he was his servant. All right. His name was Alfredo Wally Baron. And Alfredo Wally Baron was also in a few other Santo Blue Demon, in Santo and Blue Demon versus Dracula and the Wolfman.
Oh, wow.
He was a hunchback character in that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just watched that recently too. That's funny.
Yeah. He was also a hunchback character in that. But he was a very known actor for doing those type of roles, playing the role of a Re-Gor, a hunchback, or one of the servants, of the creatures of the dead, of the night. So that was Alfredo Wally Baron,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah. So
he has a long fight scene with him, and there's a lot of great fight scenes in this.
Oh yeah, there is. I mean, oh God, many fight scenes. But I mean,
no,
you
go
were
ahead.
saying?
No, go ahead.
No, but the thing about it is, he's trying to, he's trying to be the loyal servant of Count Subotai.
Right.
So when he's trying to get the woman, wanted to get the other niece too. Remember, his target was to try to get the other niece to convert, because if he would have got the two, he got Lenore. If he would have got the other niece, that would have completed the transformation. And upon him killing Mr. Coleman, Bavier, then that the how do you call it? The mission would have been completed.
Right.
Where he mentions that, he would have mentioned that now we can continue to make a world full of vampires.
Right.
Thus, the name of the movie, The World of the Vampires, because that was his mission. His goal was to kill the last surviving ancestors. Then nobody would be able to stop him on converting everybody into vampires, if you know what I mean.
Right. And that's the thing, he says that. He said he wanted to destroy humanity and create a world of immortals. But I think that's kind of stupid if you're a vampire, because if you turn everybody into a vampire, you have no more food supply.
Yeah, that's a good point there. You're right.
That made me think of, I don't know if you ever saw that movie Daybreakers with Ethan Hawke.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, so the vampires basically realized, oops, we bit too many people, so they had to treat the humans like cattle so they could make sure that they had blood,
I know, yeah, it's amazing. But maybe not the entire world, but I say the majority of them. When they begin, you have to keep some humans alive to feed off. You have to have food. So
Right.
I mean, if you do the entire conversion, I guess you don't. Your food supply chain is gone. So
Right.
who do you feed on? You don't feed among each other. The vampires don't feed among each other.
Yeah.
Because they're already dead.
I guess megalomaniacs don't think about that sort of thing. So,
Not really.
but yeah, there's so many good fight scenes, and then Rudy knocks out the hunchback, and he finds like what looks like a jail cell, and inside the jail cell there's this trap door on the floor that he opens up, and it leads to a whole underground lair. And I was thinking, why would you put that in the jail cell? Like, if you locked someone in there for whatever reason, they would just escape through the trap door,
I know, but they're not escaping. What it is that trap door is leading in further deep into the cave to where the minions and all the other vampires are.
That's
so you
true,
really,
yeah.
it's not an escape route. It's just a way of going down into the caves to where all the other clan members and all the vampires and all the creatures of the undead are there.
Yeah.
So there's no escaping from that. Once you go down there, you meet up with them. You're done. Your history. But I mean, it's not like there's a cave and they find an exit and here I am and you're out. No. But you got a good point. Why put the trap door inside of a jail cell? You know what I mean? That's a little different there.
Yeah. Now, Rudy got bit at one point, I think by Lenore, and his hands started to get hairy. And when he goes down into that lower level, and he finds the dude from the beginning that's tied up, and that guy is like getting super hairy because he's basically transforming into one of those bat monster creatures.
Right, but you can see that the transformation basically is like a two-type transformation for them, for the males.
Yeah.
So basically, they become sort of like a werewolf. They become like a werewolf because they get very hairy. If you notice the guy that was tied up from the beginning, he's on this pole tied up, but he's got hair all over his face, his arms. His transformation is almost complete, but it's like a two-part transformation.
Right.
So first you got to become like a werewolf type character, then you become the creatures, those hideous, of course, rubber mask bat creatures that are there. You become one of them with the capes opening up. So basically, that's what Rudy was going through, that transformation after being bit.
Right.
He didn't become a vampire right away because he had to go through that process of transforming into the hairy creature and then becoming the actual Batman or the bat monster, creature. But I guess it didn't go all the way through because, I mean, he had one hand for the longest time, and then his other hand he was almost to the point where he's getting blind.
Yeah.
So he was coming blind. He couldn't see hardly, but he could have a sense of hearing. Because keep in mind that they have acute sense of hearing. If you're a werewolf or you're a wolf, you can hear keen. You have your audio is very keen.
Right.
So he says, I can hear things that nobody else could hear, but yet I'm becoming blind. So that was the transformation was happening with him.
So, and the dude that's tied to the pole, he basically says, you need to stake me, put a wooden stake in my chest. And Rudy doesn't want to do that. And he frees Coleman, who's also tied up down there. And then they run out into this main room where the giant organ with all the skulls on it is. And all these vampire creatures show up. And I think the character Martha is being brought in because that's the other one that Subotai wanted to turn.
Martha. Uh-huh.
And it's great because you're watching the scene and you can almost see it on Rudy's face where he realizes the organ is the key. And, he fights his way through the monster, he knocks out Lenore, and then he gets to the organ and he starts playing that music and it's driving them all away. And I just thought that was a wonderful scene.
Yes, if you notice too, that's the ending scenes there. Count Subotai actually that he transformed more hideous.
Yes.
Where he actually was becoming like one of the bat creatures.
Yeah.
He had ears, huge ears, like bat-like ears were coming out of his side. If you notice that.
Yes,
that was part of the so that was doing. So that basically was a way of first transforming them into a bat and then killing them with the music like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. And then he just couldn't take it, and he kept running back and running back and running back. And then, he figured, well, I got to get away. And he says, the heck with everybody. So all the other bat creatures, and of course the women, it didn't really affect them much, because the women, they didn't change into anything. They were already vampires, good looking vampires,
Right.
if you know what I mean. But, so yeah, that ending scene with him playing the organ, and he knew the right notes to hit,
Yeah.
to where he could destroy all of them and free, Lenore, free Martha, and free all the rest of them, which he did free at the end there. If you notice, we're giving all the spoilers away, by the way.
Oh yeah, there's a spoiler warning at the beginning. So
yeah. Lenore, Rodolfo says, Lenore, after he, Subutai lands up fighting with Bavier, and they're all fighting there and everything else, and they landed up going to that pit. The pit was
Yes.
where basically the pit with the stakes was where Count Subutai used to throw his bat creature minions that didn't follow his orders right. He would kill them. He would throw them down in those stakes.
Oh, okay.
Remember, there was a scene, one of his bat minions didn't follow the instructions right, or wasn't able to get.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
Remember, he was supposed to get Martha, and he was in that room, and the music led him away. He couldn't finish the job of biting Martha.
Right.
Which
That's right.
He didn't get to do that, and he left. So he didn't complete his mission. So Subutai says, "You failed your mission, so now you got to die." So he throws him into the pit.
Right. And then Lenore is so distraught, even though she's reverted to human. She's distraught because whatever control he had over her, she's still like in love or enamored by Subutai, that she just tosses herself into the pit too, and it gets impaled on the spikes.
Yeah, that's really a kind of a sad ending for her, because you figure, being one of the nieces and being one of the the Colemans to survive, she did, she took her own life,
right?
But because she was already so mesmerized and wanting being a vampire, a female vampire and stuff like that, and that's being part of the undead. That's what she wanted it, So it's the thing of evil. So once evil takes over you, I guess it's always going to be that way. You're gonna, even if you come back to human form again, in most cases, in a lot of the other vampire films that we see, when the woman gets transformed back to her natural beauty, it's always after the fact, when she's already died or has a stake impaled in her heart.
Right.
Or something like that, and then she regains her beauty again, which means that a spirit gets released, a demonic evil spirit. But in the case of Lenore, she came back, she was alive, because she actually didn't get staked, she didn't get impaled, she just got bitten, and she just got stabbed a little bit with that dagger to get some blood. So upon Subutai dying, then it releases the curse on Rodolfo. He becomes human again, and Lenore becomes human again because the curse is lifted.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
I guess, like you said, with the hypnotic transitions that Count Subutai led on her to make her want to be his main queen forever, she decided to just say, "Well, I'm going to go with him."
Yeah,
and that's how it happened.
Yeah. So, Juan, give us your final thoughts on the world of the vampires.
Well, I tell you, my final thoughts on this film is, I think it is a pretty good movie. I'm saying pretty good to amazing, because for anybody that has never seen it, it has a little bit of everything. The visuals are great, the atmosphere, the vampire creatures are great. Of course, I like the idea of them sticking the capes out all the time, walking around with the capes extended, like they're getting ready to turn into bats and fly away.
Right.
The rubber bats in this film are somewhat really cool, because they use that little noise that they always use, the sound effects of rubber bats, and you can see their beady eyes. These are bats that have white eyes. You can see their eyes, and you can see the little faces, and the idea of having bat creatures like that. Remember, these bat-like creatures were used with El Vampiro started it, but then it transpired over to many of the vampire films. And I got to tell you, some of the biggest bats, rubber bats, were to be found in the movie of the Bloody Vampire and the Invasion of the Vampires. If you watch those two movies, I'm not going to spoil that one, but they have some of the biggest giant rubber bats that you'll ever see will be in the Invasion and the Bloody Vampire. I'm talking about, these are like 5 to 6 foot bats flying at you.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so you got to see that. But anyway, the idea, my premise to the film overall, to wrap up here, is it's a must-have if you like collecting the old classic horror vampire films. I mean, if you like El Vampiro, you're definitely going to like this film, okay? Because first, it's atmospheric, it's black and white, it has all the credentials of a typical Count Dracula film, except the character is not Count Dracula. He's got a different name. His cape is the same. He has a medallion around his chest. The only thing is his collar, man. That collar really, really trips me out. He's got that long collar over, cover. I guess Bela Lugosi never had a collar like that.
Right,
anyway. Right. And then his minions, his bat creature, they were all like beady looking and horrible like zombie creature faces, and it was really good. Yeah. And I recommend it. Anybody that sees El Vampiro and they see this film, also The Bloody Vampire, The Invasion of the Vampires, definitely it's a must-have in a collection if you like collecting of the Mexican vampire films of the early 60s. This is a must-have in the collection. I mean, it's just unusual because it involves destroying a clan of vampires via music, which is something that has never been done before.
Right. Yeah, I love this movie. I just thought it was so well done, was well shot. Did I ask you at the beginning, do you know if there's like a Blu-ray or a regular DVD version of this?
There is a regular DVD, a Mexican DVD version, only in Spanish.
Okay.
It doesn't have the English subtitles to it.
Yeah, they need to release this with a nicer print and, maybe some English subtitles or dubbing. Because it's just so good. I really feel people would enjoy this. That the story itself was very clever and very well done. Like you said, the whole thing about the music and how it can affect people and even monsters and animals. It was just very inventive. I liked that a lot, that aspect, because I haven't seen that before.
No, yeah, it is very atmospheric, and it
has
the music, it has the feel, and the castle and the rooms, and of course, the vampires coming in through the window and at night, and she's in bed, and you got the moon, and you got everything is very ideal to a typical vampire film, but with the add-ons of having the main characters involved in the plot having to do with music, and then of course he does give that. I like the idea of giving a summary of how Subotai, why he was there, what was his purpose, what was his mission, what was he trying to go after the Coleman family specifically. Yeah. So he did mentions that, where he's in the cave, and I like the idea of him, talking about that and saying, hey, look, this is the reason why I need to kill the last 3 survivors of the Coleman family, because they were the ones that did my people in back 200 years ago, 300 years ago. So there's a little story behind that. I like that idea. All in all, I would say the movie, if you want to give it between 1 and 5 stars, I would say I would give it 4 stars, because I mean, like you said, there has to be a better print, a nicer version of this. The Spanish version, the Mexican version, is an official release in Mexico, but it doesn't have English subtitles.
Right.
That's the only thing. But it is a very beautiful print, remastered from the original prints.
Right. Yeah, I definitely recommend this, people. And right now you can find it on YouTube. So I highly recommend people should check this out. Well, folks, thank you for joining us today. That was part 1 of my discussion with Juan Ortiz from the B-Movie Cast about Mexican vampire films. And that was World of the Vampires. So the next time you hear the two of us together, we will be discussing a movie from 1967 called Empire of Dracula, also an awesome Mexican horror film. Okay, folks, that's all the time we have for today's episode. Thank you for joining us for our special 2022 13 Days of Hallowtober event in which we're discussing vampire films this year. I just want to briefly remind you that we've got a live streaming monthly series called the Fright Lounge in which we discuss all horror media for seasoned horror fans, as well as those of you who don't know if you want to get into horror. We've also got a new podcast called The Cult Movie Lounge, in which award-winning blogger Robert Manell and I discuss all cult movies all the time. And here's, of course, our sister show, The East Meets the West, in which we discuss Shaw Brothers films and spaghetti western movies, all of which can be found at our website, Haven Podcasts, that's plural, havenpodcasts.com. And while you're at our website, be sure to click on our Patreon link and TeePublic link to help support the show. We've also got a YouTube page, so please go to youtube.com/user/UncleDeath1 and subscribe to it. And don't forget to hit that little bell so you get notifications when we put out new episodes. And of course, we want your feedback, so please email us at thenisnow42@gmail.com. And you can also join in the conversation at our Facebook Then Is Now podcast group as well. Then Is Now podcast is part of the Dorkening Podcast Network, so please check out the other great shows there at thedorkeningpodcastnetwork.com. That's right, folks, and all of those links, like I said, they're on our website as well as in our show notes of every episode, and we are on all the podcasting apps. So if you like our show, please go to wherever you download your podcast from and leave us a great review, because that bumps us up the list in the algorithm and helps more people to find us. Thank you for joining us today. Class dismissed.
Then Is Now podcast is intended for entertainment, educational, and informational purposes only. Sounds, music, and clips played during this podcast are the property of their copyright holders. All original content is copyright Jupiter Media.
For more shows like the one you just heard, check out the Dorkening Podcast Network at thedorkening.com.